Shalom Alachem, and welcome back to the broadcast. Peace be upon you. I'm Sean. Website is scriptureandprophecy.com. That's where you go to support this mission, and that's where you find all the archives and devotionals and other resources like so. It's Thursday morning, October 25th, 2018, and we're doing this week's gospel portion, although we have to switch it up a little bit, and I'll explain why here in just a second. But like always, I want to start by outlining this week's Torah portion, which is kind of where we draw the gospel portion anyway. And if you're wondering what is all this Torah portion, gospel portion, what does all this mean? If you go to torahportions.org, torahportions.org, they've got it pretty well outlined. But basically, they are regular readings that's been going on for thousands of years in a certain calendar order. The reading of the Torah in such a way that you read the whole Torah in a calendar year. And so it's referred to as the Torah portion schedule. And there's also a prophets portion schedule. And then TorahPortions.org also has a gospel portions, which is what we're following and doing. And it usually correlates with the Torah portion for this week. So the Torah portion, the name of it is Vayera in Hebrew, which means, and he appeared, because the first story in this week's portion describes how the Lord appeared to Abraham one day as he sat outside his tent. Section Vayera continues with the series of test of faith for Abraham, concluding in one great and final trial. So it's the theme of the portion is about this testing of faith, and we're going to read about that today. But the Torah portion, just to give you a quick outline, you've got the promise from God to Abraham and Sarah that they would have a son. You've got judgment pronounced on Sodom. You've got the depravity of Sodom. Sodom and Gomorrah is destroyed. You've got the shameful origin of Moab and Ammon. Abraham and Sarah at Gerar. You got the birth of Isaac. Hagar and Ishmael are sent away. Abraham and Abimelech make a covenant. The command to sacrifice Isaac. And then the children of Nahor is what the portion covers, which is Genesis 18:1 through 22:24. And by the way, if you just want to listen to those chapters, you can do that on my YouTube channel, or you can find them in the archives for the podcast, because I did the whole book of Genesis and a study through it last year. All right, here's the part where I say I've got to switch things up. A couple weeks ago, we read, the portion was Luke, and it was to go through from like 20 through 27 or something like that. And I went ahead and read verses 28 through 37 in addition to that, not realizing that 2 weeks later, the portion would ask that I read verse 28 through 37. And that was the week where it talked about the days of Noah, and I went ahead and read through the next part of that, which says the days of Lot, because I thought this goes together, but that was really meant for this week. So I'm just going to read through it, but I'm not going to commentate it again. Go back and listen to 2 weeks ago. I think the podcast is even labeled The Days of Noah, gospel portion, The Days of Noah. I'm going to read these 7 verses real fast, and just so you know what the portion is. And then we're just going to zero in on the prophet portion for today. So hopefully all that makes sense. If you've been listening to this series for a while, or you've heard me talk about Torah portions and gospel portions and prophet portions before, then this all makes sense to you, but I'm just giving some detail real fast. And I apologize for the rambling, but just in the event that we have some new listeners. So let's read the scheduled gospel portion for today. Starting with verse 28 in Luke chapter 17. Likewise, also it was in the days of Lot. This is referring to what it'll be like with the return of Christ. Likewise, also it was as in the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. So, before I read the last 6 verses, let me just quickly point out, the Torah portion deals with the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Jesus is saying, the last days, here's a sign. It'll be like it was in the days of Lot. And of course, we look around. All you have to do is look around, friends. Let's just call it what it is. It is the days of Lot. The United States of America has become Sodom and Gomorrah, like it or not. And let me remind you of a warning from Peter, in the book of Peter. He says, Sodom and Gomorrah are an example unto those who should hereafter live ungodly. Jesus is saying right here in verse 29, it'll be like the days of Lot. People will be going about their regular business. They'll be eating, they'll be drinking, they'll be buying, they'll be selling. But just like it was then, Lot was removed. Fire and brimstone rained from heaven and destroyed them all. Even thus shall it be in the day when the Son of Man is revealed. Verse 31. In that day he which shall be upon a housetop, and his stuff in the house, let him not come down and take it away. And he that is in the field, let him likewise not return back. Remember Lot's wife. And if you remember the story, Lot's wife, they were escaping the city. The angels were taking them out. They were told not to look back. Lot's wife turned and looked back. And there's lots more information about that subject if you read the historical books, like Jubilees and Jasher. And I've covered that on the channel before. Verse 33, whosoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it, and whosoever shall lose his life shall preserve it. I tell you, in that night there shall be 2 men in one bed, one will be taken, and the other shall be left. 2 women shall be grinding together, one shall be taken, and the other left. 2 men shall be in the field, and one shall be taken, and the other left. And they answered, and they said unto him, Where, Lord? And he said unto them, Wheresoever the body is, thither the eagles will be gathered together. Also, I've addressed this in another podcast. What does Jesus mean when he says, wherever the body is, thither the eagles will be gathered together? And I think that what he's getting at is it'll be obvious, right? If I live here in Indiana, we have these huge big buzzards. They're like these big black birds with red heads. They're the most disgusting creatures. They scavenge, and they're always in the middle of the road eating roadkill or whatever. But if you look up into the sky and you see like 7 or 8 of them circling an area, you can conclude, without a doubt, that there's a dead carcass somewhere near. I think what Jesus is getting at is when his return comes, it's going to be painfully obvious. You can't miss it. You won't be able to miss it. And he's specifically in this passage talking about how, one will be left and one will be taken, which some believe may be referring to the catching away of the righteous, which could make sense, seeing how we are dealing with this passage. And, Jesus is describing what the culture will look like, but reminded them that Lot, who was considered the righteous of that city, was removed before the destruction came. So we will have to see, won't we? It's not one of the subjects that I argue about anymore. All right. I want to take a look at the prophet portion for today with the remainder of our time. The prophet portion, believe it or not, is actually out of 2 Kings. 2 Kings chapter 4. So if you have a Bible, you can turn there. 2 Kings chapter 4, and you think, well, that's not a prophetical book. Well, it actually is dealing with a prophet. And specifically, it's dealing with the prophet Elisha. And the widow's oil is probably the name of it. 2 Kings chapter 4. verse 1, and we're reading through verse 37. So let's take a look. I'm reading from the King James Bible. Remember, the theme of the portion for this week is faith. Testing of faith. Verse 1. Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, Thy servant my husband is dead, and thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord, and the creditor is come to take unto him my 2 sons, to be bondmen. And Elisha said unto her, What shall I do for thee? Tell me, what hast thou in the house? And she said, Thy handmaid hath nothing at all in the house, save a pot of oil. Then he said, Go, borrow these vessels abroad of all thy neighbors, even empty vessels, borrow not a few. And when thou art come in, thou shalt shut the door upon thee and upon thy sons, and shalt pour out into all of these vessels, and thou shalt set aside that which is full. So she went from him. She shut the door upon her and upon her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured out. And it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said unto her sons, Bring me yet a vessel. But he said unto her, There is none, there is not a vessel more. And the oil stayed. Then she came and she told the man of God, and he said, Go, sell the oil, pay thy debt, and live thou and thy children of the rest. All right, before we move to the next part of the story, let's do a quick overview. We have a woman, she comes to the prophet Elisha, and she says, My husband is dead, we had debt, now the creditors are threatening to take my children as slaves to pay off the debt. And the prophet says, Hey, what do you want me to do for you? What's in your house? And she explains that she has nothing but a little bit of oil. And he said, Go and borrow vessels from thy neighbors. So think of like jars or whatever you would keep oil in. And borrow a lot of them, he says. And then when you've got them, you go into your house, shut the door, and pour the oil into the vessels until all the vessels are full. And it's one of those things where the oil doesn't run out, right? She just keeps filling the vessels and keeps filling the vessels, and the oil doesn't run out, and the oil doesn't run out. And then she is told to sell the vessels to pay off her debt, and then her and her family can live on the oil that still remains. And so it's this picture of great faith. And here's something that I think we should point out. And this is something that I've experienced in my own life with problems. You know, when you run into a problem, a financial problem, you owe taxes, medical bills, we all run into these things, whatever it is. It's been my experience that God just doesn't snap his fingers and boom, all your problems are gone. Have you ever noticed that? You pray, God, please take this issue away from me, but he doesn't really take the problem away, typically. But what he does is he provides you a way to deal with the issue. You know, a lot of times it seems that God wants to take us through the storm, right? And then we come out on the other end with greater faith, greater reverence for God, greater trust. This woman, she's crying out to this man of God, saying, look, here's the problem. And he doesn't snap his fingers or say, hey, they're going to forget the debt. No. He provides her with a way to get herself out of debt, to do what's right, to pay off the debt she owes, and then to have a way to live moving forward and provide for her and her sons. That's typically how things have always worked in my life, and I think that's what we should expect. Is not, God, please just remove all my problems, but God, please give me the ability to deal with them. Let's move on to the next story. Verse 8. And it fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem, where was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And so it was that oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. She said unto her husband, Behold, now I perceive that this is a holy man of God, which passeth by us continually. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed, and a table, and a stool, and a candlestick. And it shall be, when he cometh to us, that he shall turn in thither. So what she's saying is, look, this guy who keeps passing by our house from time to time, I perceive that he's a holy man of God. Let's prepare a room for him so that every time he comes by, he's got a place to lay his head down. Verse 11. And it fell on a day that he came thither, and turned into the chamber, and lay there. And he said to Gehazi, his servant, Call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. And he said unto him, Say now unto her, Behold, thou hast been careful for us with all this care. What is to be done for thee? Wouldst thou be spoken for to the king, or to the captain of the host? And she answered, I dwell among my own people. And he said, What then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, Verily she hath no child, and her husband is old. And he said, Call her. And when he had called her, she stood in the door. And he said, About this season, according to the time of life, thou shalt embrace a son. And she said, Nay, my lord, thou man of God, do not lie unto thy handmaid. And the woman conceived and bare a son at that season that Elisha had said unto her, according to the time of life. All right, so Elisha wants to know what can be done for this woman. She's been so gracious to us, being a host to us, always providing us with bread and a place to stay everywhere we come. He tells her, one of the things that she's longed for is to have a child, but her husband is old. And so Elisha calls her and says, Hey, this time, next season, or about this season, you're going to have a son. And she says, Please, don't say these things. She doesn't want the prophet to lie. She says, No, my lord, thou art a man of God, don't lie unto thy handmaid. But sure enough, at that season she conceived, just like Elisha told her. And then we move on to the next part of the story, verse 18. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said unto his father, My head, my head. And he said to the lad, Carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon, and then died. And she went up, and she laid him on the bed of the man of God, and she shut the door upon him, and went out. And she called unto her husband, and said, Send me, I pray thee, one of the young men, and one of the asses, that I may run to the man of God, and come again. And he said, Wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither noon nor the Sabbath. And she said, It shall be well. Then she saddled up an ass, and she said to her servant, Drive and go forward, slack not thy riding for me, except I bid thee. So she went, and she came unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said unto Gehazi his servant, Behold, yonder is that Shunammite. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, Is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, It is well. And when she came to the man of God, to the hill, she caught him by the feet. But Gehazi had came near to thrust her away, and the man of God said, Let her alone, for her soul is vexed within her, and the Lord hath hid it from me, and hath not told me. Then she said, Did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, Do not deceive me? Then he said to the Gehazi, Gird up my loins, and take my staff in thy hand, and go thy way. If thou meet any man, salute him not. And if any salute thee, answer him not again, and lay my staff upon the face of the child. And the mother of the child said, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose, and he followed her. And Gehazi passed on before them, and laid the staff upon the face of the child, but there was neither voice nor hearing. Wherefore he went again to meet him, and told him, saying, The child is not awakened. And when Elisha was come into the house, behold, the child was dead, and laid upon his bed. And he went in therefore, and shut the door upon them twain, and prayed unto the Lord. And he went up, and he lay upon the child, and put his mouth upon his mouth, and his eyes upon his eyes, and his hands upon his hands, and he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. Then he returned and walked in the house to and fro, and went up, and stretched himself upon him, and sneezed. And the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi, and said, Call this Shemunite. So he called her, and when she was come in unto him, he said, Take up thy son. Then she went in, and fell at his feet, and bowed herself to the ground, and took up her son, and went out. And that is the end of the portion for today. And so we have this second story of this woman. She knows it's a man of God. She's got a house prepared for him. He promises her a son. And when the son has grown a little bit, he gets some massive head problem and dies. And I think the point, the faith part that we're supposed to grasp from this is that she didn't accept just the outcome, did she? It was an obvious outcome. She went to the man of God. I think the attitude, these people in these two stories, these two women, both of them had an issue, and they went to get a word from the man of God, the man who spoke for God at that time. Luckily for us, we live in a point in time where we can come directly to the throne boldly, according to the scriptures, because we have Yeshua, we have Jesus, and we can go through him and we can pray directly to God. And I think the point that we're supposed to take from this is, regardless of what the problem is, we go to seek the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords for the help with faith. This woman believed. He even said, Look, just go take my staff and put it on the kid's face. And she was like, No way. As the Lord lives, as Yehovah liveth, as thy soul liveth, I'm not leaving without you. Because she believed. She believed that if he came, he could heal her child. And sure enough, it was done for her, according to her faith. According to her faith, it was done to her. And we see examples of this over and over in the New Testament, where people come to Christ. They fall at his feet. And according to their faith, they were healed. Blind people. The woman who had a bleeding problem all of her life. She thought, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, I'd be healed. She touched, and the power went through, and she was healed instantly in that moment. Several examples we could look at. We live in a day and age where it's hard to have great faith. It's hard. We're up against a lot. But we need to remember these stories of faith. We need to remember Abraham, which is what the original portion is about. Genesis, Abraham. He believed God, and it was accounted to him as righteousness. A promise was made to him in chapter 18. Maybe we can even find that really quickly. Genesis chapter 18. It says, let's see. I'm not finding the exact passage. But, he tells the story, and Sarah's laughing about it because it seems so absurd that her and her husband, being as old as they are, should bear a child. But then verse 14, in Genesis chapter 18, it says, Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Is anything too hard for the Lord? But if you go back, the passage I'm thinking about is even back further. But the scriptures say that, Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness. It's about faith. The whole thing's about faith. Without faith, nothing can be accomplished. Salvation, your very salvation is based on your faith in Christ. Believing that he accomplished what he claims to accomplish. Believing that he is who he says he is. Believing, having faith that he died for your sins. And that God rose him up from the dead 3 days later. It can be hard to have faith, and we need to cling to these stories of great faith. And Abraham is a great example. In this story, in 2 Kings, of these two women fighting up against these impossible circumstances, but had faith. Well, that is the podcast for this morning. And I pray that in some way it's blessed you and served you well. And if it has, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Peace and grace be with all of you. And until next time, God bless.